There are an estimated 1.6 billion followers of Islam, yet Muslim-majority nations produce a disproportionately small share of the world's scientific output. Annually, more books are translated into Spanish than into Arabic in the last 1,000 years. The lack of scientific output is stunning. There is no single explanation for the negligence of science in the Islamic world, just as there is no single ruler who inaugurated it and no single event that fueled it. The truth is that the Islamic Golden Age witnessed a complex sequence of unforeseen events. My name is Shirvan and welcome to Caspian Report. In the previous episode, we explained how the Silk Road globalized knowledge and led to a new school of rational thinkers known as the Mu'tazilites. Their doctrine was to give a coherent account of religious beliefs, and they firmly believed in the absolute free will of humankind. However, the relationship between state and religious authority can sometimes be obscure. In the year 833, Khalif al-Mamnun, the 7th Abbasid ruler, saw an opportunity to acquire religious authority at the expense of the ulama scholars. He formally institutionalized the Mu'tazila doctrine and sought to eradicate other theological schools. As such, the Khalif enforced an inquisition known as the Mihna. Scholars who were employed in state-funded schools and madrasas were forced to profess their allegiance to Mu'tazilism and submit to the curricula of Neoplatonic philosophy and Aristotelian metaphysics. Those who refused were punished by lashing, imprisonment, or beheading. Al-Mamnun passed away in the same year as he decreed the Inquisition, but his policy was continued through his immediate successors. Most intellectuals submitted to the official Mu'tazila creed. However, a scholar named Ibn Hanbal from Baghdad refused to recognize the rationalist doctrine. He argued that the Quran was eternal and that it was not open for interpretation or innovation. Hence, the scholar and his followers rejected free will, metaphysics, rationalism, and subscribed to the literal interpretation of the Quran. Ibn Hanbal's theological view could not be more different than the Mu'tazilite scholars, who argued that the anthropomorphic verses in the Quran, which mention the hands, eyes, and face of God, indicate that the holy book should not be interpreted literally. Building on that, the Mu'tazilites stressed that the Quran was open to rational interpretation and innovation. In any case, for his defiance, Ibn Hanbal was imprisoned, tortured, and even banished from Baghdad. For over a decade, the Abbasid rulers tried to break the scholar, but in their pursuit, the Caliphs had inadvertently made Ibn Hanbal a folk hero. Over time, the Inquisition became unpopular with the people, and in some cases, riots erupted in the streets of Baghdad in support of Ibn Hanbal. Under these circumstances, in 847, al-Mutawakkil ascended to the throne as the 10th Abbasid ruler. At the age of 26, he reigned over the largest empire in the world. Yet his authority was in question and he needed to swiftly restore his legitimacy. Thereupon, al-Mutawakkil enforced a populist decision. The Caliph ended the Inquisition and effectively endorsed the literal creed of Ibn Hanbal. In the end, the defiant scholar had outlived 3 caliphs. As he was hailed a champion of Islam, Ibn Hanbal founded his own institution of theology that bore his name. This had a profound impact on the course of Islamic civilization. For one, religious authority became an exclusive purview of the ulama scholars, and the caliph's role was reduced to political authority. Second, Ibn Hanbal's defiance reduced the credibility of the Mu'tazila. As such, in the following decades, a backlash against Mu'tazilism spread across the Abbasid realm. And third, the end of the Inquisition facilitated the formation of more orthodox theological movements, many of which are still active. For instance, at the present, the Safa'i school is predominant in East Africa and Southeast Asia, while the Maliki school holds an influence in Africa's Maghreb and Sahel region. Meanwhile, the Hanafi curricula prevails in the former Ottoman territories and Central Asia. As for the school of Ibn Hanbal, in the 18th century it experienced a reformation in the Wahhabi Salafi movement, and therefore its influence is limited but predominant in Saudi Arabia. Anyway, Al-Mutawakkil, who ended the Inquisition, appointed his oldest son as his heir. However, over the years the Caliph shifted his favor to his second son. This rivalry extended into the political sphere as well. The eldest son, Al-Muttasir, was favored by Turkish slave soldiers, who at the backdrop of the scientific progress had turned from slaves to warriors to entrusted advisors and military commanders. Meanwhile, the youngest son, Al-Mu'taz, was backed by the traditional Abbasid elites. Al-Muttasir feared that his father was going to move against him, so he decided to strike first. The eldest son had his father killed by a Turkish bodyguard and became the 11th Caliph. But within half a year, the new ruler was poisoned and passed away. So the Turkish military leaders held a council and selected another Abbasid relative as the 12th Caliph. However, plots and treachery were all around, and within a few years the new Caliph abdicated power to Al-Mu'taz. The youngest son, who assumed power at the age of 19, lasted for nearly 3 years until he was betrayed, beaten, and left in the scorching heat without food or water, where he died 3 days later. This era in history is known as the Anarchy at Samarra, and what followed was a period of intense instability and violent successions of caliphs. As the Abbasid realm disintegrated from within, Turkish Mamluk slaves effectively seized power and reduced the authority of the Caliph to a ceremonial role. As such, in mid-9th century, rebellions popped up in every corner of the realm. In North Africa, a severe drought had resulted in food shortages. As a result, riots erupted in major cities in Tunisia and Egypt. The central government in Baghdad was incapable to provide for the basic needs of the remote settlements, and so local rulers substituted the central authority. In Egypt, Ibn Tulun, a Turkish Mamluk, took over the region's finances and established a military force that was loyal to himself. He became virtually independent and founded the Tulunids dynasty that extended from Egypt to Syria. Elsewhere in North Africa, the Aghlabid dynasty had effectively proclaimed independence and ruled over Tunisia, Libya, and Sicily. At the same time, in the Caucasus, the Sajids and the Shirvanshahs took over power, while the Anatolian lands were controlled by the Hamdanids. Further east in modern-day Central and South Asia, the Turco-Persian dynasties of Samanids and Safarids reigned over the land. But it wasn't just the remote frontiers of the empire that detached. Rebellions even erupted in the proximity of the capital. For instance, in Basra, the Zanji people, who were East African slaves transported to the Middle East, revolted against their Arab overlords. At least 500,000 people lost their lives, and it was one of the bloodiest rebellions in history. In the same era, a small group of radical Shiites, known as the Karmatians and sometimes called the Bolsheviks of Islam, sacked the holy city of Mecca and looted the sacred black stone from the Kaaba. Elsewhere in the realm, the radical anarchist Khawarji movement, which had been responsible for the Islamic civil war 2 centuries earlier, rejuvenated their campaign to overthrow the caliphs. Unrest, rebellions, and revolutions were everywhere. Within a short span of time, the effective control of the Caliph was reduced to the proximity of Baghdad. However, the decay of the Abbasids did not hinder the intellectual process. Since education and art had become a fabric of Islam, many of the powerful regional dynasties continued their patronage for scholars. As a result, brilliant intellectuals emerged all over the Islamic world. One of the most comprehensive thinkers was Al-Farabi, who made enormous contributions to physics, chemistry, mathematics, and psychology. He also excelled in philosophy, ethics, and music. For his wide range of accomplishments, Al-Farabi is known as the second master after Aristotle. Another brilliant mind was Al-Haytham, who wrote extensively about astronomy, mathematics, optics, and visual perception. He established the modern scientific method and thereby became the first legitimate scientist in history. The Golden Age also saw advances in medicine thanks to Ibn Sina, whose work remained in use for the following 6 centuries. Yet many of the great minds of the Islamic Golden Age were also fierce critics of the literal interpretation of the Quran. For instance, Al-Biruni, who calculated that the earth revolved around the sun and rotated on its axis, challenged the literal creed of Ibn Hanbal by insisting that it was essential to question everything from religion to philosophy. The irrational position was shared by Al-Razi, who was a scholar of Da Vinci's magnitude and once argued that Islam without reason had no value. Then there was Khayyam, one of the most influential thinkers of the Middle Ages. He was a fierce patron of humanism and expressed secular ideas in opposition to the design of Sharia law. Another leading scholar was Ibn Rushd, who advocated for the emancipation of women and stressed that matters of belief should be decided only on the basis of reason and evidence. It was clear that the Mu'tazilites were fighting back against orthodox theology. However, the political circumstances were not in their favor. Despite their best efforts within a century, the great minds of the Islamic Golden Age would end up as dissidents. But we will go over this and more in the next episode. For now, this was a Caspian report by me, Shirvan. I want to thank our contributors on Patreon for their support. YouTube has demonetized nearly all of our content, so help us to produce more reports like this on patreon.com/CaspianReport. And if you don't have the means, then just share this video with your friends on social media. Anyway, signing off, and Saul.